Welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. Welcome everyone, we're going to talk about ancient and royal bloodlines, secret political meetings, Clinton, Trump, satanic ritual abuse, dragons and snakes, reptilians, human sacrifices, Illuminati, secret societies, alien invasions, the Antichrist, and we're going to go straight to our guest now. So, Tracy Twyman is a US author specializing in non-fiction from Kansas City, Missouri, I believe. She writes about esoteric history, and some of her books include Clock Shavings, Solomon's Treasure, Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, and Baphomet, The Temple Mystery Unveiled, co-written with Alexander Rivera. I was going to leave out the Merovingians mythos because I wasn't sure how to pronounce it, but there you go. I hope that's okay. Before writing books, she was the editor and publisher of Dagobert's Revenge magazine. Her articles have been published in magazines such as Paranoia and New Dawn, and she's appeared numerous times on radio shows, television shows, film documentaries. Some of her interviews you'll be able to find in places such as the National Geographic, Jesse Ventura's Conspiracy Theory, the documentary film Bloodline, also Coast to Coast AM, who I'm sure many listeners are familiar with, Ground Zero, Freeman Fly, Richie Allen, Far Out Radio, End of Days, who we chatted to recently. If you think along the lines of Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, you'll get a flavour of some of the topics Tracy covers. Tracy, welcome to Truth Sentinel.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
You cover so many topics in your work, and I realise that some of my questions can't be answered really in depth in the time we have, but maybe in our chat we can have an introduction to some of these topics, and people can look at your websites, interviews and books for more knowledge later, and we'll give more details about that at the end.
Okay.
There's so many things in the real world that are linked to these topics. I was even playing online chess today and listening to one of your podcasts, and you said chess had its origins in voodoo or something like that, and I almost lost the game, but I think I won that game in the end. How many years, first of all, have you been researching these topics, and what motivates you?
Well, the whole thing got started really when I was a teenager. I was going to college, actually. I dropped out of high school and I started going to a community college instead, and I became one of the writers at the school paper there. I ended up just writing a column every week about sort of conspiracy theories and alternative history. And, so that's how I got started writing professionally in a way, because I was getting paid by the hour to work there. And, I was researching these articles really in depth. They were very long, scholarly articles, really. So that went well. I got a lot of mail from the public from doing that. I got on the radio, interviewed about one of my articles about the Federal Reserve, and it kind of got me started. And then a couple years after that, I started doing this thing. It was because I had been reading these books, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and Messianic Legacy by Michael Baigent and Richard Leigh. And these are books about the theory that's popular now because of the Da Vinci Code. But these books came out in the 80s, and they were nonfiction bestsellers back then. I read them 10 years later in the early 90s when I was a teenager. And these books sort of inspired me. They were about the idea that there's a bloodline coming from potentially Jesus and Mary Magdalene, a royal bloodline in France, and that members of this bloodline have been plotting basically to take over the world ever since Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And actually the theory is that the Merovingian kings of France, the first kings of France, were from this bloodline as well. And after that dynasty got deposed, they've been sort of plotting to take over Europe, plotting to take over the church, Catholic Church, and the world. And there's the secret society associated with them called the Priory of Zion, which is itself, according to their own literature at least, connected to the Knights Templar. They claim that the Knights Templar were their military arm. So I learned all about these topics. I had just turned 18, I think. Read these books. They really, just were so intense. I thought they explained a lot of aspects of history that I had been bothering me for a while. Connections between things that I could sort of see, but I couldn't explain. And I thought, this is a great idea, that there's this, gigantic conspiracy connected to this royal and holy bloodline. And so I decided to put out a magazine as though it was being published by this organization, Priory of Zion. but it never even said that. It didn't say that outright. It was just sort of, there were all these esoteric hints inside of the magazine. It was basically like something where you would print it. I printed it at Kinko's and folded it up and stapled it in the middle. It was like 12 pages. It wasn't very long. But anyway, I called it Dagobert's Revenge, and I went and just distributed it for free all over different places in Portland, Oregon, where I lived at the time. And I even gave it to a few Masonic lodges and stuff. Back then, there was this scene in Portland, Oregon called the zine scene, and there were lots of, self-published publications, magazines like that. And so mine was one of them, but mine was definitely one of the weirdest. That's what everyone said. And so I ended up doing that magazine actually for about 10 years or so, or 8, I guess. I did it until 2003, and it changed a lot over the years. We ended up doing, offset printing of, an 80-page magazine that had very in-depth articles in it that were nonfiction, serious, historical researched articles. I was working with some other people along the way. I folded the magazine because eventually after a few years, it just wasn't economically reasonable anymore to do it. But I took all the information that I had gleaned from those years of research, and I wrote a book called Merovingian Mythos, the one you were afraid to pronounce. I mean, I really should have picked a different title for it, I guess. But at any rate, I published that book. It was actually, I think, it must be the only book, or almost the only book, that has the word Merovingian in the title. And I think it's one of the best, most in-depth books about that whole subject, about what they call the Grail bloodline coming from the Merovingians. So I think people should check that out if they're interested in that subject. And that's how I got started writing books.
Great, and we'll talk more about the bloodlines and secret societies later, but let's talk about some secret meetings. I saw on your site you wrote an article about the mysterious meeting between Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch, and where they said they spoke about grandchildren. Most people thought it's unlikely that they spoke about grandchildren, but do you think this could have been a threat? They really did speak about grandchildren along the lines of if you ever want to see your grandchildren, or you want to guarantee the safety of your relatives, then you know what you have to do, and perhaps offering future career prospects as a bit of a carrot as well. Do you think that could have happened?
That's what I theorized on my website a few days ago. And the real reason why I thought that, actually, this is something my father suggested when I was just having a phone conversation with him a while ago. This is when, just the day after the plane meeting had happened, he's the one that suggested that was actually sort of the implied message of the meeting. Now, everyone else was saying, they probably really, he either threatened her or bribed her or both. And that's what the meeting was about. But then she came out, Loretta Lynch came out and did testified with Congress, and she told them there was a witness. There was some member of her family, maybe her husband or something. She said there was a family member there and also 2 flight attendants. There were witnesses to this conversation. And then she oddly said, she'd never met Bill Clinton before, except that she shook his hand once, in a line with a bunch of other people. So she didn't know this guy. So all of a sudden, Bill Clinton, the former president of the United States, knocks on the door of her airplane while she's on the tarmac and decides to come in and start talking about his grandchildren. I think she's probably telling the truth about what he said. She's not coming out and saying the rest of how she understood it. Bill Clinton does not have to put a lot of secret messages in. He doesn't have to use a lot of subtlety. I mean, the threat is there already. If you know anything about him, anyone who's worked in D.C. in the last 20 years would know.
Just a certain look. He could just look at you in a certain way whilst talking about family, and that could be enough.
Well, he's got a reputation. Both of the Clintons have a reputation that any person that gets in their way, even if it's accidental, inadvertent, they force that person to, fall on their sword, get out of the way, take the blame, make sure that nothing bad ever happens to the Clintons. And they make all the people around them, cover for them, sacrifice themselves for them every time they get into trouble at all. So, one of the examples I brought up on my website, Kathleen Willey is this girl that Bill Clinton sort of groped and molested in his, I think it was in the Oval Office one day while he was president. And then later, just because some other people happened to know about this, She really wasn't trying to hurt Bill Clinton at all. She told a couple of her friends what happened. And then later, Paula Jones, another victim of his, tried to depose her to get her testimony, in her case, to make a pattern case to say that, this guy goes around, molesting people all the time. So Kathleen Willey was being forced into testifying against Bill Clinton. She didn't want to. But Bill Clinton had some thugs come over and threaten her. They killed her cat. They, I guess, popped her tires. And then they came over and some jogger came over and said, "Hey, how are you? How are your kids doing?" Mentioned her neighbor's name and her neighbor's children also. And then just, mentioned the cat that had gone missing, the tires, and said, "Hey, you're just not getting the message, are you?" I guess what I'm saying is, like, someone who's got a reputation like Bill Clinton, it's like dealing with someone in the mafia who has a really bad reputation for killing people. If they come up and say, "Hey, how are your grandchildren? My grandchildren are doing well. I love my grandchildren. I hate if something would ever happen to them. They're the light of my life." Mm. If someone comes up and says that to you, and he's known for murdering anyone who gets in his way and their children, then yes.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah, she was probably telling the truth when she said they were talking about family. I think you're definitely onto something there. But Bill Clinton also obviously has a reputation and a checkered past when it comes to relationships with women. But I heard you also chatting on another podcast about Trump as well, and his links to Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein, who was convicted of soliciting underage girls for prostitution, and actually received a prison sentence for it as well. And Epstein's admitted to socializing with Trump. And when a lawyer asked if he'd ever socialized with Trump in the presence of underage girls, Epstein pled the Fifth Amendment, basically. So I think that's probably why they're not going to bring stuff up like that too much when in the campaign, because they're both as bad as each other, maybe.
It's funny, too, because, okay, the person you're talking about that I was interviewing for my YouTube channel was Robert Murrow. He's one of the co-authors of this book, Clinton's War on Women. And the other co-author on that book is Roger Stone, who was very involved in Trump's campaign, still is involved in Trump's campaign. And at one point, Roger Stone, this is a few months ago, was being interviewed by Sean Hannity about Trump and the Trump campaign, and about, the adversary too, Bill and Hillary Clinton. And Roger Stone brought up Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Clinton's connection to him, and also brought up Bill Clinton's, history as a rapist. And it was just strange because, about a month later, after Roger Stone brings this up in an interview with Sean Hannity, some kind of a signed deposition was made by a woman claiming to have been a victim of Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump. That and this is true, actually, that Donald Trump knew Epstein was in his little black book, the same black book that Bill Clinton's phone numbers were in. And actually, when the charges first surfaced about Epstein, they asked, reporters asked Donald Trump about it, what he thought about these charges against his friend. And at the time, Trump made a statement saying he didn't think it was true, that he knew that Epstein liked girls, and young girls, but he didn't think that he was doing anything criminal. So it's interesting. Yeah. I guess the subject came up before, one of Trump's campaign people brought the subject up of Epstein in connection to Bill Clinton. But yeah, I would expect that particular subject may not come up again just because of this rape charge that against Trump. That, it hasn't gone to trial yet. It's just a charge that someone has made, but they did, make that charge under oath. It'll be interesting to see where this goes because, Donald Trump is definitely making Bill Clinton's history as a sexual predator, one of the campaign topics. So yeah. I don't know how he's going to handle this.
And the black book you mentioned was nicknamed the Holy Grail by an employee as well, incidentally. Another friend of Epstein's was Prince Andrew from the British royal family. And, there's lots of scandal surrounding the British royal family. Prince Charles seems to have strong friendships to people such as, he had strong friendships to people such as Jimmy Savile, one of Britain's worst child abusers.
Yes.
There's been so much scandal and evil surrounding the royal family in the UK. Alternative media is rife with accusations of ritual sacrifices and things like that. I'm sure you've come across that in your work and talked about it. Do you know if there's any evidence that any of that's been going on with the royal family?
Well, no, I don't know if there's any evidence connecting the royal family to what we would call satanic ritual abuse in modern times. A few years ago, I wrote this book about this whole subject of SRA and mind control. It was called Mind Controlled Sex Slaves in the CIA. And so at the time I was mostly examining, the conspiracy literature that's about this subject. And I definitely found two things. One, there's a real correlation between child sex slavery and, sex abuse, the child pornography industry. There's a real connection between that and the intelligence industry. A lot of the intelligence agencies use this tactic all the time, actually, to compromise people that they want to utilize. They want to control them somehow. So this tactic of setting them up with a child prostitute and filming it surreptitiously is apparently something they do to a lot of people. It's been going on for decades, and they keep doing it. And I don't really understand why rich and powerful people keep falling for it, really. But I guess it seems like the appetite for sex with children is so strong amongst, I guess, the rich and powerful of the world, that this is just a very effective way to entrap people, I guess. So it does seem like all the intelligence agencies are using this, honeypot method to entrap and compromise people, but specifically with child prostitutes often. And then so there's this other aspect where some of the people who have been victims of this, who have been child prostitutes, or at least that's what they claim, some of them say that they were put under mind control while they were doing it, that they were conditioned to be the best sex slave. And so then it gets even weirder that some of these people say that part of that conditioning involved being part of a satanic ritual, and that some of the sex abuse that they endured took place as part of a satanic ritual, or a pagan or somehow occult ritual that could be perceived as satanic. So, I wrote this book about this subject, and I found definitely each one of those things, those relationships, has some history behind it. So, for instance, the relationship between Satanism and mind control and sex abuse, you find over and over again some cases where that is, that has definitely taken place. For instance, there was a few years ago, there was this church in Louisiana where the pastor actually ended up coming out and confessing that he had been molesting all the kids, and that he was a Satanist, and it was all part. He had turned the church into a satanic church. They were doing satanic rituals. That's just one example. There was an orphanage in Spain where they ended up convicting some people. It turned out that the orphanage was basically using all the children as sex slaves. They were turning the orphanage into a brothel, and they were prostituting the kids to rich and powerful people in Spain. And the thing is that they were doing it in conjunction with, I think it was actually a British intelligence operation to try to compromise some people. And I need to look at my records again on that subject. But I do recall that there was an intelligence organization that ended up being implicated in the whole case. I can probably bring up some more cases. There's several examples in that book, Mind Controlled Sex Slave.
And did you cover the Cathy O'Brien case?
There's extensive interviews in Mind Controlled Sex Slaves, that book, an interview with Cathy O'Brien. And I've done some radio interviews since then where I talked about this. So I have to admit that, at the time I was not really convinced about the veracity of Cathy O'Brien's story. One of the reasons being that she wouldn't on the phone mention the same names to me that she had in the book. She claimed to have had sex with every living president.
Including George H.W. Bush.
Right. And then she even said she was sexually abused by Hillary Clinton, and that Hillary carved the face of a witch inside her vagina.
Oh my goodness.
So, and there's actually, if you want to look this up, apparently there's a video on YouTube of her getting a clinical exam to show this face, as she calls it, on her genitals. Which I've seen the video too. I can't really tell what I'm looking at on the video. It's really hard to tell if there's actually anything there or not. So I don't know. I don't want to bash a potential rape victim, but she wouldn't on the phone to me say George Bush did this to me. She said, I'm not going to name names. So I thought that was odd. And her story is extremely, it's one of the weirdest stories ever that anyone has ever said. So
yeah, I mean, on Wikipedia, even if you just look on Wikipedia, it quotes her as saying Bush apparently activated a hologram of the lizard-like alien.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know what to make of that. It seems like you can deal with this whole subject without dealing with Kathy O'Brien, and that there's all these verifiable stories that one can look into. And so that to me is way more interesting than, there's Kathy O'Brien. Then there's a couple of others that are almost like her, but they all came out after her with similar stories. I don't know what to do with these people. And then, I mean, there's tons more of people that haven't written books, but just have similar stories. I've gotten contacted by some of them and they all, they're crazy. So, and I can't tell, are they crazy? Were they already crazy? Or are they crazy from all this mind control and abuse? I don't know. It's impossible to tell.
When you talk about lizard-like aliens, then it obviously makes people think of reptilians. My friend actually calls our queen Queen Elizabeth. It's a bit of a joke. But what's special about the royal bloodline? I mean, do the royals have some kind of reptilian blood? Or is there something special about their blood? I mean, Prince Edward, part of the royal family, once spearheaded a campaign for people to give blood in the UK. And then he admitted that he wouldn't actually do it himself. And they asked him why, and he just wouldn't give an answer. So there seems to be something a bit weird about their blood. I mean, is there? What would you say is special about the royal bloodline?
Well, okay, two things. First of all, the answer to your question, just there's a innocent potentially reason why a royal person wouldn't want to give their blood, which is two reasons. I wouldn't either, and here's why. If I'm famous to that level, I would want to be careful about that. For one, someone could use your blood against you in a magical sense for a magical ritual. Okay. For another thing, someone could clone you, implicate you in a crime. So I can see why he might be concerned that someone might do something with the blood other than what's intended. But as far as what is special about royal families in general, this is what my research indicated. Why do we even have this tradition of royal families? Where does this idea even come from? Because basically, in almost every culture, the idea is really that the royal family is sacred and descended in one way or another from something superhuman. Almost every culture has a story like that. And generally, a lot of the stories are very similar. So the sort of archetypal story is that gods or angels came down from heaven and interbred with humans, and the children of that were the first royal families. And in the Judeo-Christian tradition, it's strange because we kind of have a negative view on this, or we have a memory, that we find in the form of a fable or a myth in the Bible about angels coming down and breeding with humans, but this was all in that story done against the will of God. God did not want this to happen. So the angels coming down, they were really fallen angels. They came down from heaven to this earth, bred with humans. They were cursed, and their children were cursed also for doing this. So the angels didn't get to come back up again. They got stuck down here and then down below as well. A lot of them got locked up in Tartarus or in some kind of subterranean dungeon is what we're told. So, but this is the memory of what, the origin of royal bloodlines is. So, you have that story in the Judeo-Christian myth, but then you've got a lot of other different versions from different cultures where it's normally a celebrated thing, right? That the royal family comes from gods. And that's why they are special. They're, depending on the culture, they're often perceived as being not only holy, but also perhaps psychic, magical, possessing transcendental wisdom, things like that, and there's the idea that the blood itself has a magical property in it. that the Merovingians of France, there was this myth that there was something magical about their hair. They couldn't cut their hair because it was magical. So this kind of stuff persists, I think, and there's sort of a subconscious memory of it in the minds of the public. I think, definitely in England, obviously, it's still very strong. People, still having this urge to prostrate themselves before the Queen and feeling that there's something special about that bloodline. Some of them feel sad sometimes that they think that maybe the bloodline's getting watered down. They're marrying, outside of the bloodline too much. So it's obvious that the public still has this sort of memory. And another point of evidence of that is that almost all of the heads of state in the West are related to each other, and they're all related to royal bloodlines. And in fact, in the United States, you can even usually predict the outcome of the presidential election based on which candidate has the most blue blood. So, I mean, this stuff definitely still has its magic, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, in the UK, there's so much propaganda over the royal family, positive propaganda, that, still a lot of people think it's a good idea. I mean, I make my views quite clear on most of our well, not most of them, but some episodes. I can't believe that people still think it's a good idea. It seems ridiculous. But going back to Edward and the blood donor campaign, I still think it's a bad idea, just to have him as somebody urging people to donate blood when he's not going to do it himself, though, whatever his reasons. But that's a kind of common trait in the royal family in the UK. I mean, you had William, Philip and Charles campaigning for the protection of animals, whilst they're still continuing going out hunting and killing them, increasing the Queen's huge ivory collection, which is one of the largest in the world. And actually, I was looking at some photos of it today that was on the BBC, and they showed a sword with an ivory hilt showing Perseus rescuing Andromeda from a dragon. And I thought that was quite apt with some of the topics we're going to be talking about. I mean, dragons crop up a lot in the work you do as well. I mean, is there anything? Why do you think they might be having swords and things like that have got this kind of these kind of mythical creatures, dragons and things like that? And all around London, we've got dragons and gargoyles. I mean, what's the symbolism of the dragons?
Well, it depends on the culture and the time, but generally, dragons and snakes tend to represent sort of the primordial chaos, which is, again, in almost every culture, you'll find this kind of mythology where there's this idea that before creation, there was chaos. And in the Judeo-Christian version, they talk about there were these waters that existed before creation, right? And then when creation happened, the waters above were separated from the waters below. You almost get this idea that we're inside this bubble of creation, outside of which is all this chaos, like molecular chaos, right? We're talking about something, whatever's out on the outside of creation that we're in, it's stuff that can't even combine into atoms. It's not able to organize itself at all. So that's why it's chaos, and that's why you view it as an ocean, kind of. And another symbol that persisted in the ancient world for this was the dragon. So the chaos is the dragon, or it's a giant snake wrapping around creation. Sometimes it shows the snake with the tail inside its own mouth, or there'll be two dragons or snakes, and they're each eating the tail of the snake in front of it. So, and the symbolism for that is, as people have said before, eternity, kind of death and rebirth, but really, because it's the primordial chaos, it's timelessness is what it's representing. It's showing that this is the stuff that's on the outside of time, right? So everything that's on the inside, reality, is part of time-space, but this chaos in the outside is not part of that. And yet, and then there's really, you could think of what's keeping us inside as time itself. And so what's interesting is that a lot of ancient cultures used to represent the universe as kind of a series of concentric spheres. So, they thought of the stars up above us and specifically the planets, each one of those was a different level of existence. You know, each planet was ruling a heaven, as they called it. They're all stacked on top of each other. You know, and that orbit, we think of it now as an orbit, is the heaven that planet rules. Now, the outermost sphere in a lot of these diagrams, for instance, a lot of the Greek systems, the outer sphere was the one attributed to Saturn. And Saturn, or Kronos, is the god associated with time, and death, and things like that. So the idea is basically there's a snake or a dragon on the outside. That's the chaos. Then you've got this enclosure that's separating the chaos from everything else, and that's time. That's Saturn. And then inside Saturn's belly is everything else. So that's why you have the symbol or the story that Saturn consumed all of his children. His children were the other planets. And so everything else is inside of his belly right now. And we're basically trapped inside of the prison of time. So, and then outside of that is the dragon, which, you know, depending on your point of view, is either good or bad. I mean, Gnostics, for instance, viewed this whole thing as very negative, what I was just describing. And, you know, like I said, they saw Saturn as this prison that we're in, and he's sort of like the evil grandpa that you know, consumes his own children. And then the dragon on the outside, well, it's funny. They thought that if you could get on the outside somehow, then you'd get to real reality, whatever real reality is. So if you can get beyond the dragon of chaos, then you can somehow figure out what real reality is. I don't know.
Well, that's pretty deep. And you mentioned consuming of children, and I was going to talk about the sacrificing of children as well, and sacrificing of humans. In fact, that story I mentioned, Perseus rescuing Andromeda from the dragon, she was there to be sacrificed. And there's a lot of the work you do covers human sacrifices, child sacrifices. They crop up a lot in ancient stories. What are these sacrifices for, and who benefits and how? You know, even in the Bible, Jesus sacrificed his sins for humanity. Why would that be necessary? I mean, is there anything you can shed light on? Who benefits from being sacrificing children or just humans in general?
Well, I do kind of deal with what I think is the mythic origin of this, and I was just talking about it, really. Child sacrifice, in particular, the idea of God sacrificing his own son, or someone sacrificing their own child to God, the king sacrificing his own son. These are like the most old, most primordial rituals in human history. So really, when religion got started, it started with a child sacrifice. I would think that was meant to represent the sacrifice of the God's own son. Now, it's sort of a mystery, so there's no way you can explain it, I don't think, as, you know, how does it work or how does it help? Really, how do the physical mechanics of it work? I don't know. That's why it's kind of a metaphysical thing. It's a supernatural thing, but it's a very, like I said, primordial thing. So all the religions believed in this stuff, and even Christianity is really just trying to, you know, find a nice replacement for these old bloodthirsty rituals. But yeah, it's what do you have in the Bible? You have from the whole, you know, Genesis, basically the first few books of the Bible or the Old Testament is telling you how this primordial sacrifice morphed into different versions as, you know, the Hebrews and then the Jews progressed and evolved as a culture. So, you know, it starts out with Abraham, right, being called to sacrifice his own son, but then he's given an animal as a substitute. And so that's God's way of showing you, well, you can substitute an animal instead. And then later they show this sacrifice being replaced actually with a monetary sacrifice, so that you could actually sacrifice money to the temple, or you could give your firstborn son as a, you know, to be trained as a priest in the temple. That's another way to sacrifice. But all this is to represent or cover over the need for the real sacrifice, which is blood. They explain it in the Bible a little bit, and then you see the same sort of thing in the myths of other cultures. They say specifically that there is spirit in the blood. The blood is the life, they say, right? I mean, that's what it says in the Bible. Blood is the life. There's the story about, Noah, okay? When Noah lands, his ark on the mountain, and he comes out, and there's nothing to eat. There's no crops because everything's been destroyed. Everything is just mud. That he sacrifices one of the animals that he had on board to God, and God smells the sweet aroma coming from the burning sacrifice, and that's what attracts God to come down and talk to Noah finally after 40 days of floating around. And it tells Noah, basically they institute this new covenant, and it's implied therefore that the rules were different before. What the covenant is it basically says that you can eat meat, but just don't consume the blood inside of it. And then it specifies why. It says that the blood is for God, that he wants to consume the blood. So you got to wonder what that's about. But actually, once you start looking at other myths from other cultures, it all starts to make sense too. That like the Greeks had stories about how sacrifice got instituted, and in their Zeus actually got tricked into choosing. They had this deal where they would sacrifice an animal, and then they would separate like the meat and the all the tasty parts, and they would give those to the priests, and then the rest of it, like the bones and stuff, they would give to Zeus and to the gods. And so the story is that Zeus was tricked into choosing what his portion of the sacrifice would be, and that they took all the bones and then put fat on top and greased it up to make it look nice and tasty. And Zeus was so stupid he accidentally chose that instead of the good tasty meat. The reason why I bring that up is just there's another example. We have several stories, myths from the past that tell us that the gods like to eat meat, and specifically that they really like blood. And not only that, but that the blood, really should be for them and not for us. And then in the Jewish tradition, that's literally how they do it. They make sure that the humans don't get to have any blood so that God can have it. Now I have this theory about it. Okay. So I think that this is real. Like, they really do somehow consume spirit, I guess, or maybe soul. Maybe soul is a better term for it, because they're spirits. What they don't have is soul, and that's what we have, but they don't. But that stuff is in our blood, and they are able somehow to extract it from wherever they are. They're in some part of the universe that we can't see, and they are able to consume this stuff when it is offered to them, when it is sacrificed for them. So that's why you have all these stories that are consistent really from culture to culture throughout the years, that this is what religion is. You offer meat, bloody meat, to the gods. That's what it's all about. Well, why do you have to do this? Because they need that somehow. They're in a place, they're beyond time and space, but what they don't have is generation. They don't have blood, life. They want it. So the whole purpose of religion really is for us to channel this soul substance to them. And that's why they invented, through us, they helped invent all of these religions so that we would offer them this stuff. And now, what it has to do with Saturn, I'll explain very clearly. The myth of Saturn is one where they say that there was a golden age of Saturn, before the world that we're in now, there was the golden age of Saturn. They say nobody had to work. Everybody had exactly what they wanted, given to them for free. It was one season, summer all the time. Everything was nice. But the catch was that this was sort of maintained by Saturn constantly swallowing his own children as soon as they were born, because he was afraid he would be usurped by one of them. He had been given a prophecy that one of them would eventually usurp him and become the king. And that is what eventually happened in the story. Zeus broke out of his stomach and let all of the other children out as well. And they had the war of the Olympians against the Titans. And the new order, which is sort of the world creation, took over from the chaos world that existed before, which is remembered as the Golden Age. So what we have here is timelessness the paradise that existed before time that was maintained by preventing the future from happening. And so that's swallowing the children before they're born, keeping time from happening. But eventually, the children won the day and they broke out. Time happened, creation started, and all of those chaos elements got pushed outside of basically of a boundary. So the creatures that are now on the outside, which were represented in Greek mythology as monsters, the Titans, giant monsters, giant dragons and things like that, they are hungry for the lifeblood of the people inside the enclosure. And even the gods of reality, the Olympian gods, as they're represented in Greek mythology, they also are hungry for the life that's going on with the actual living creatures that are inside of this enclosure. That's us. We have something they don't have because we can move through time. And as we're moving through time, we die and when we generate new life. And that's something they can't do. And, so in order to participate and feed off of the stuff that we have here, they have to encourage us to offer them blood as sacrifice. So there's a very long-winded answer to your question there.
No, but thanks. Very interesting. And obviously the perpetrators of sacrifices are often, people often think of satanic cults and also secret societies. There's the Bohemian Grove where they do what we presume is mock sacrifices. That Alex Jones showed the video of some of the things that went on there. And then you often talk about Priory of Zion and OTO, Knights Templar, and the Illuminati. Are they still prevalent in today's society? Things like the Illuminati. People always talk about it, but is it actually really still a society, or is it just going under different names now?
I think of the Illuminati as something that happened in the past. It was a particular movement around the time of the French and American revolutions. It was a conspiracy really on the outside of Freemasonry to penetrate Freemasonry and use it for political ends. And yeah, I think it's sort of morphed into other things over time. What it is now, Illuminati is like a catch-all term. It's like saying the establishment or the man or something. It's just a word for sort of the secret society that's running everything. And, maybe some people take that really seriously, I guess, because some people actually think Rihanna is a member of the Illuminati, and all these pop stars. It's just silly, really. maybe there's a group calling itself the Illuminati and all these people are part of it. I don't know, but I don't think it has any connection to Adam Weishaupt in the 1700s. But, it's just a term. These days it just means, the secret government. And I think in entertainment, I think if nothing else, there are musicians and people directing music videos that want this idea out there, that there's an occult movement going on within pop music. So I think they're sort of feeding and fanning the flames of the conspiracy theories just to sell records, really. I think that's what the conspiracy is in the music industry. It's just to sell records.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because Katy Perry and Lady Gaga and Rihanna, they all seem to use lots of symbolism in their videos. But you think that's just literally just sort of to help sell records, and
mostly, yeah, just to enhance the images of the artists, because the music is just so terrible now. They really have to come up with new gimmicks to try to get people to buy concert tickets and stuff. But also, it serves a purpose. I think that, not just the music, but there's a lot of movies and TV shows that kind of throw it in your face, basically, that, there's a conspiracy and, martial law is coming, FEMA camps, all that stuff. They throw it in your face all the time about, the banking cartels and how they control everything. And I think it's a bit on purpose, to make people, get used to it, to make them feel a little helpless, basically. So the telling everyone that their favorite pop stars are part of the Illuminati is just, it makes you feel helpless. It makes you feel like, There's no one to look up to. You can't even turn on the radio and enjoy a fun song and take your mind off it. There's no escape, really.
Yeah, yeah. What about the Rosicrucians? I mean, some people, I'm sure you've heard of the Georgia Guidestones, right?
Yes. I never thought, when I studied stuff about the Rosicrucians, the historical society, that some people even wonder if it was a real thing or if it was just a hoax. But, when I look back at the Rosicrucians from the 1600s and stuff, I really never thought of them as being a, genocidal movement. So
do you think that's a hoax? Do you think that could be a hoax then, or do you think there's any links between what's written on those Georgia Guidestones, which some people have linked to Rosicrucians? Is there anything within that society that looks like it could be linked to something like that?
Not really. I mean, okay, there's sort of a hint in the Rosicrucian manifestos that they have this alchemical secret, and then they're going to use it to take over the world. All the people who wrote about alchemy sort of said this, that like Albert Pike wrote about it, the Masonic author said the secret of alchemy is something so powerful that whoever masters it can take over the world. That does, so almost every secret society plotted to take over the world. That's why people do that stuff, so they can take over the world. That's why you form a secret society. As far as whether they really want to kill a bunch of people or not, I don't think that many secret societies had that as the goal. Some of them did, I guess, but that's not common. Now, as far as what connects the Georgia Guidestones to Rosicrucians, nothing except the initials of the person that it's attributed to him. He financed it and sort of had this thing built. It was under his instructions. But all we know I think it's RC is his initials. So that's all we know.
Yeah.
There's no Rosicrucian symbolism on the monument. There's no other significance whatsoever.
So it's a bit of a loose link. What about the Skull and Bones Society? I mean, people often talk about that society. They seem to be wanting to take over the world since, a lot of presidents seem to come from that society. Do we know who the current members are? Presumably not, otherwise it wouldn't be much of a secret. But could we assume one of them will become president again one day?
Oh, probably. No, we do know who the members are. This stuff is known. If I wanted to look it up right now, I could tell you. I mean, I haven't looked it up recently, but it's a known fraternity on the campus of Yale University. There's a record, and it's not really hidden about who's a member. And I don't know that they want to take over the world. They just want to have as many of their members in positions of power as possible, particularly in the United States. But I don't find Skull and Bones to be, sort of the ones controlling anything else. They're just sort of taking care of their own. It's kind of just, a nepotism society, really, I think. And they use this malevolent symbolism really for hazing. I think, it's just, I mean, it goes along with the symbolism of a lot of other secret societies. The whole death and rebirth thing is a pretty common ritual when you first get inducted into a fraternity. They are a bit extreme in that they make their members confess all of their sexual history when they first get in. I wouldn't doubt that Skull and Bones is one of these groups where they get a blackmail tape on every member before they send them out into the world to get a job. Everyone's been compromised, I think. And that's really, they're almost open about it, that's the purpose of that ritual where you confess your sexual history, is so that everybody in the group has the dirt on everyone else and everyone's mutually implicated. But I wouldn't doubt if Skull and Bones goes further. I mean, I wouldn't doubt if they have parties with prostitutes and videotape it and stuff like that. Yeah. It's very likely.
Sort of changing the subject a bit. One of our past guests was L.A. Marzulli, who predicted a coming fake alien invasion. Do you think there may be an invasion of Earth by sort of either real or fake extra-dimensional reptoid creatures disguised as humans?
Well, what I think is probably, Plan Z on the agenda. It's the kind of thing they might resort to at the end when they've run out of everything else. But I mean, that would be a pretty complicated thing to do. But I think they are working on it. They have that in their arsenal. Like they have this, blue beam type technology where they can make, holograms appear in the sky. And more than that, they've got this ability, I think, to fake events. I don't know about which conspiracy theories, I believe, but like people talk about crisis actors. They think that some of these mass shooting events are fake and things like that. I don't know that I believe it. I don't have any proof about any one of the cases in particular, but I will say this. I think it's entirely possible. I think that the public is gullible, and also that I think the capability of faking news events with completely fictional characters involved, and CGIing things to make it look real, and then you just drown out the dissent from any eyewitness who says they saw otherwise. Just drown them out with so many other people telling their own versions. I think that's entirely possible. So the alien invasion thing, yeah, it could happen, but I don't think they even need to resort to that anytime soon. The public, they may be more aware than ever before, but they don't seem to be in a position to act. So I feel like we're all very vulnerable right now, and I don't think the New World Order needs to resort to an alien invasion anytime soon.
I was going to talk about alchemy, but probably don't have time for that. So I'm just move on to my last question. It's a shame, actually, because I could do with making some gold at the moment to pay the rent. But have you seen and heard enough yourself to be sure there isn't only a physical world, that there's a spirit world and an afterlife? By some of the things you've done, and do you believe that there is a darker side, a darker non-physical world? Do you believe it exists from what you've seen and heard?
Oh, absolutely. If listeners want to pick up my book, Clock Shavings, it's probably actually my most popular book now, and it's a memoir of my 15 years now doing Ouija board seances with some of the spirits, mostly gods and demons and things like that, but we have talked to some dead people as well. And yeah, a lot of our questions that we ask these spirits is about the nature of the universe we live in. What is it like over there on the non-physical side? What's the relationship between things? So I'm definitely convinced that there is an unseen world, and we're really just a fraction of what exists. The reason why I got started doing that really was as part of our research. I started trying to talk to a dead French artist for one of my articles I was writing. Ended up getting referred to all these demons and stuff, and they ended up answering a lot of my questions. So I use that material sometimes. I get ideas from the spirits that I talk to, but I never just take that information and put it in a book without actually researching it first. So it's basically a springboard, gives me ideas about what to do with my research. And the other thing is that they've told me some really freaky things, really. The conspiracies that you touched on in this conversation today just pale in comparison to what the spirits actually say they're plotting to do to us. And they do say that they're working with human minions, working through secret societies and things like that, to bring about, a sort of a dire end to humanity at the end. But if you all want to read about it, Clock Shavings is the name of the book. And you can also find on my YouTube channel videos of some of these seances. And I think it'll blow your mind. Everyone who watches this stuff walks away thinking that, definitely we had a real supernatural contact.
And do you talk about the Antichrist in that? I heard you name him on another episode, but do you talk about that in your books at all?
We did have some conversations with one of the spirits. Actually, Baphomet wanted to tell us about what he said was going to happen at the end of the world. A lot of that stuff didn't pan out so far. Like, he said that John Kerry would be elected president and then be assassinated, so that never happened. He said that the Antichrist was some guy named Bert Russell, and he lives in Europe. And I haven't seen any sign of this guy so far.
Well, I googled Bert Russell, and there was a lawyer, an up-and-coming religious lawyer in the US, I think. Keep an eye on him, everyone, Bert Russell.
Okay.
What about Prince William as well? I mean, not only you, but other people have said that he might be. Someone's transposed the Turin shroud onto his face and says it's pretty similar.
Yeah, I did do a project at one point with Clyde Lewis, who's sort of obsessed with this idea. I don't know if it's available anymore. I think it's unavailable. But at the time, it was called Antichrist 2012. It was just like a Kindle book, but it was all about the symbolism surrounding Prince William and his family, and that if you interpret it in such a way, it might be indicating that he may be the Antichrist to come. But if nothing else, I mean, there's definitely a lot of weird symbolism surrounding the royal family. The royal wedding was, I'll have to talk about this some other time, but it was literally based on the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, the Rosicrucian and alchemical manuscript. They scripted the whole wedding based on that. So there's a lot of interesting things.
There's also Diana's death, I know, which you've talked about, and some people believe was a kind of another ritual sacrifice as well, which certainly wouldn't surprise me. But as ever, we've run out of time, at least for this episode anyway. Thanks for joining us. Is it TracyTwyman.com? Is that your website?
That's right.
Okay, so that's Tracy and then Twyman, TWYMAN.com. People can go there to check out your books and articles, and there's some link to podcasts, but you can go on YouTube as well. There's a lot of really interesting interviews, and thanks for doing an interesting interview with us as well. And as I'm sure a lot of other hosts have said, you've got so much interesting information that we'd love to talk to you again at some point and definitely talk about Diana's death. But thank you ever so much for coming on and joining us today.
Sure. It's been great. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tracy.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.
All right.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the show. Check us out at www.truthsentinel.co.uk. And you can also find us on YouTube, Truth Sentinel with Scott. Thanks for listening, guys. Have a good week. Goodbye.